Chapter 1234. In the Magic Mirror's live broadcast, the Scourge army and the Kiraj insect people were fighting non-stop. Every moment, there were hundreds and thousands of undead or Kiraj insect people being destroyed. If it was somewhere else, Thuzad might have jumped up in joy. With so many corpses, it was enough for him to pull out a terrifying undead army that could sweep across half the continent. Obviously, Thun, who was in the deepest part of the ruins of the Kiraj temple, would not let Thuzad do as he pleased. At first, there were many insects that were killed and resurrected as corpse insects, devouring their own kind. In addition, the fighting style of the insects was to bite one of their legs and bite one of their heads. It was extremely brutal and direct. Basically, insects of the same level would end up dying together. This kind of fighting style was obviously disadvantageous to the Kiraj insect people. However, with a small trick of the ancient god in his half-asleep state, Thuzad suddenly discovered that the canopy of undead, which was usually accurate everywhere, could not be held up in the sky above the Kiraj temple. An even more ancient and evil will forcibly took control of the weather here. This forced Thuzad to let his subordinates engage in the most primitive form of attrition with the insect people. Other than the insects, the Kiraj insect people also had monsters like the Anubisat giants and the obsidian golems. The Scourge army used the fat abominations and various deformed large-sized monsters to fight against them. Whether they were willing or not, the two sides fought until the sky was dark and the moon was dark. Go. Kill it. Why do you have to use your feet to step on it? You can roll over. Don't you think this lich is a joke? Releasing a bug swarm storm on a construct? Take a horse stance and punch it with your left hook and right hook. At the highest level of the Breaking Dawn Mage Tower in the Dalajan, it was very lively. Almost the entire floor echoed with the shouts of a certain Bad Alliance commander, as well as the giggles of seductive women. How lucky. If it wasn't like this, the Night Elf warriors would have to face such a monster with their flesh and blood. My heart aches. Tyron gently pressed her hand on her sexy collarbone. Duque, you're so bad. Queen Sylvanas rarely showed her tender side. His impression of Queen she had always been extraordinary and valiant. Perhaps it was due to her environment, but in history she carried the fate of the entire kingdom as a ranger general, but she also had to bear the future of the entire Forgotten Ones. In this life, although she was crowned queen, and with Duque's help, the elf situation was much better. But she had to always wear a mask called strength. However, after being captured this time, Sylvanas suddenly realized that he was weak in a certain sense. It turned out that at certain times, there were many things that she couldn't resist or control. In the most desperate moment she called out Duque's name. Duque did not disappoint her and responded to her call for help. From being ambushed by the Burning Legion, to falling into the enemy's hands, to almost dying, to somehow returning safely. At this moment, Sylvanas still felt as if he was in a dream. Tyrant, on the other hand, was even calmer. This was not the first time she had been captured. She was right next to them, supporting her chin with her hand, perfectly accompanying them. If Duque wanted to play any tricks, she would not reject him either. But Duque did not force them to do anything, understanding that they were still in a state of shock, and only occasionally rubbed their ears against each other. At the start, Duque seemed to have endless desires. Sylvanas's long legs and Tyron's Mount Hyjal were all places that he would forget to leave. However, after a long time, one would realize that people's passionate love would turn into a kind of attachment that they couldn't bear to part with. It was as if after getting used to each other's existence, they could no longer bear to be apart. It was a strange love mixed with kinship, rich and lasting. Duque, I've advanced. You two aren't together? Jaina rushed in excitedly, but was surprised to find that Duque was just hugging. Duque bared his teeth. All right. Congratulations, Breaking Dawn Great Wizard Jaina. Jaina put her hands on her hips. Hey, my lover and teacher, when are you going to become a demigod? As for the requirements to step into the divine realm, Duke already had a vague guess. The three divinities of fire, arcane and ice were obviously necessary. But now that he had fused with shadow, he needed at least a holy divinity to balance it out. This gave Duque a headache. But now he had an idea of a frost divinity, Frost Dragon Saffron. Duque had thought that he would get rid of the great frost lich, Thuzad. Who knew that his target had changed to Saffron? If that was the case, it would be much more convenient. In case Saffron's divinity was not enough, Duque had another target, Syndagosa, who had saved Arthas in Fellwood Forest. This former queen of the Blue Dragons and now the mother of the Frost Dragons, was definitely qualified. However, with the entire Ice Crown Citadel forcibly sealing itself in 10,000 years of ice, Duke had no way of finding trouble with Syndagosa. As for the holy divinity, the only one Duque could think of was the Naru of the Outland. Divinity was a very precious thing. If it was the one in Shotrath City, it was not impossible to achieve his goal through negotiation. The only problem was arcane magic. Duke couldn't figure out where he was going to get the divinity of the Arcana system. However, he could only cross the bridge when he came to it. At this moment, seeing Jaina wagging an invisible tail with an expression that said, "Praise me quickly," Duque smiled. "Don't you want a reward? Come. Let me give you some pointers on the flow of magic in the ORZ position." Jaina's face instantly turned red. Even though she was hesitating, she still obeyed. Putting aside Duque's nonsense, Duque played hard this time, forcing the Scourge army and Si Thun to fight each other, which greatly reduced the pressure on the Alliance and the Horde. The Horde was able to catch their breath. Without the harassment of the flying insects, Thrall was able to successfully complete the work of disaster relief and organizing the troops. This time Thrall gave a clear answer. If the Alliance can send 100,000 troops, the Horde can send 50,000 warriors to attack on Karaj and Silithus. After the Alliance got rid of Ragnaros and Nefarian, Duque gave the important task of dealing with Hacker to William. He brought a group of people and rushed over to support Aurelia. While Queen Sylvie and Tyrande were resting, Duque went to visit old Mograine. Duque could hardly recognize Mograine. Chapter 1235. Old, decrepit, dispirited, lifeless eyes. Sally Whitemane was taking care of such an old man in a room with thick curtains that could barely see a trace of sunlight. Duque could not associate the old man in front of him with the Ashbringer who had conquered the Molten Core a few months ago. What happened? Duque muttered to himself. Sally, who was dressed in a priest's robe, trotted over and whispered into Duque's ear, "Both of father's sons are..." Duque only understood the whole story after Sally's explanation. Due to Duque's reminder and the phantom enchantment that was placed in Alexandros' armor, Alexandros managed to escape death. Escaping death did not mean that he had obtained happiness. When the Burning Legion space trap was activated, the furious old Mograine went to clean up the mess. Due to losing his hammer, he pulled out his sword and ended the life of his son, Reynold, who had defected to the Scourge army. However, this was not the end. Almost instantly, the aura of death hidden in Reynold's heart turned him into a Death Knight. However, the Scourge army's conspiracy did not stop there. Old Mograine's youngest son, Darian Mograine, had secretly disobeyed his father's order to stay behind and followed him to the Sotero River. At this time, he did not see the scene of Reynold's sneak attack on his father. Instead, when he turned around, he saw his father kill Reynold with his own hands. Darian did not know the ins and outs of the matter, but seeing his father kill his brother with his own hands, he was even more confused. At this time, the spy who brought him here revealed his true face, the undying assassin. He easily killed the confused Darian and brought his body back to the Scourge army, turning him into a Death Knight. Within a day, of his two sons who could have inherited his legacy, one rebelled and was killed, while the other was killed by a sneak attack. Both of his sons, who were originally paladins, suddenly became Death Knights. For an old paladin who had fought for Rotterdam his whole life and fought against the Scourge army for 6 years, nothing could be more shocking than this. It was obvious that the physical injuries were secondary. The mental trauma was the key. Sally's eyes were red and she looked as if she was about to cry as she said, "Ever since that day, foster father has barely eaten or slept. I don't know what to do either." Duque looked at Sally and sighed deeply. The situation in this life was much better than in the original history. If this had happened at this point in time, old Mograine would have died long ago, and Reynold and Sally would have fallen into the Mad Scarlet Crusade, becoming the cheating couple in the players' mouths. Now, Sally had been completely cleansed and had become a priest surrounded by holy light. But Duque couldn't estimate the suffering of Reynold and Darian. There was nothing he could do about it. He was also a human being. He was mentally and physically exhausted to be able to take care of the people closest to him. What's more, this had happened while he was on an expedition to Blackwing's Nest. He was truly powerless. The longer he stayed in this world, the more he integrated into this era, the more Duque felt emotional. Is it Duque? Old Mograine still looked confused. A look of pleasant surprise appeared on Sally's face. This was the first time she had heard her foster father speak in several days. Yes, it's Sir Marcus. Mograine twisted his neck that seemed to have mostly rusted to death, revealing a face that was still sunk into the abyss of despair. "You're so busy you don't have to come see me. I've had enough. As an old man who is about to die, I've had enough. Whether it's as a subject, as a holy knight, or as a failed father. My life has come to a point where it needs to be summed up. He spoke very slowly, but it made Duque feel as if the sharp teeth of a saw were pulling at his heart. Duque strode forward and pressed his hands on old Mograin's broad shoulders. No. Alexandros. It's not time for your life to be summed up. In the name of the commander of the Alliance, I order you. Look at me. The old man raised his head in confusion. The next second he saw Duque switch to his own state. First was the glittering holy form. In Alexandros' impression, the bright holy light on Duque's body could almost catch up to that of Archbishop Alonso's Fail and Uther. After another second, Duque suddenly switched to shadow form. The dark aura that was as deep as the endless universe made him, a holy knight, shudder. Duque, you mean? Duque seemed to be implying something. Do you see? The boundary between light and darkness is not that clear. Similarly, the boundary between life and death is thinner than you think. A while ago, the tribe announced that in order to resist the terrifying Courage insectoid army, the Forsaken would be included in the tribe. The Forsaken. Is it that guy Anastrian? Yes. Why did the Alliance acquiesce to this? Isn't it because the enemies who want to destroy the world of Azeroth are too many and too powerful? The Burning Legion, the Scourge Army, the Ancient Gods, the Elemental Lords, and all kinds of inferior evil gods. Alexandros, this world has long passed the era where the Alliance alone can defeat the enemy. Old Mograine was silent again. Yes. We hate the tribe because they brought a terrible disaster to the Alliance. Millions of soldiers and civilians died tragically under the tribe's slaughter. We will never forget this. But now the tribe is our alliance. The Scourge Army also swept through the Long Song Forest, and Anastrian also betrayed his people and became an Undying. But now they have no choice but to stand on our side and fight for the world. Old Mograine looked up at the sky and let out a long breath. He understood what Duque meant. Since the first Undying can escape the will of the Lich King, then there will be a second, a third. Maybe in the future, Darien will rejoin the Alliance as a Death Knight, or at least become a comrade of the Alliance. This was not Duque boasting. According to the original development of history, Darien would break free from the control of the Lich King Arthas and lead a large group of Death Knights to form the Black Blade Knights, turning to fight for the righteous cause of the world. Hearing Duque persuade him like this, old Mograine suddenly laughed. Duque, you're really bad as the commander of the Alliance. You actually didn't let a 60-year-old veteran retire. Seeing the old paladin's smiling face, Duque knew that old Mograine had thought things through and patted his shoulder. Yo, old brother, it's not time for you to sum up your life. Chapter 1236. After taking care of old Mograine, Duque led the army to the Sin Dorii kingdom without stopping. With Naxxramas forcing Courage to surrender, the Scourge army had to fight the bugs head-on. The Alliance's military strength, which was originally very tight, suddenly became abundant. In the camp in the southeast of the Long Song Forest, Duque and the others met Aurelia, Rothma Theron, and Hadgeron Mingi. After not seeing her for a while, Aurelia had lost a little weight. The pair of giant cats actually showed signs of shrinking. They were originally a very violent symbol. Whether Duque wanted to or not, they easily dominated Duque's vision and gave off a sense of mass. If there weren't outsiders, Duque would have reached out to confirm. Aurelia smiled charmingly at Duque and hugged Duque lightly. Then she hugged her second sister, Sylvanas. Sister, are you okay? I'm fine. It's just that someone pretending to be Kel, Thuzad touched my thigh. It's disgusting, Queen Sylvanas complained in the whisper of the wind. Aurelia couldn't help but laugh. Beside her, Sasha also laughed. It had to be said that when the three sisters laughed together, the scene was as beautiful as a painting. Duque was left to the side. He was basically a passerby. Aurelia combed her bright blonde hair. I knew that Duque would definitely save you as soon as he came out. I will continue to carry out my duties. If I really died and became an undead, what would you do? Queen Sylvanas suddenly asked her sisters. Aurelia sighed. She didn't know how to answer. Generals would inevitably die in battle. Who could guarantee that their loved ones wouldn't die? Moreover, the four sisters often fought on the front lines. Suddenly, Sasha replied cleverly, Yes, it must be Duque's fault that we couldn't save you in time. Then I'll have many daughters with Duque, and then add a compound surname to each of them. Yes, it's called something Sylvanas Marcus. Duque was speechless. After fooling around for a while, they returned to the main topic. It's time to put an end to the millennia of conflict between the elves and the ogres in the north. As Duque spoke, almost every elf present felt a chill in their hearts. In the past, the proud elves might have scoffed at such words and scolded Duque for bragging. Now, Duke had used his miracles again and again to conquer the hearts of every elf with all kinds of miraculous achievements. Even if they knew that Duque, that bastard, had stolen the heart of their most respected queen, and even the queen and her sisters, they were willing to accept it. Following Duque's declaration, the sky suddenly darkened. Even the elves on the watchtowers who were on duty couldn't help but look up at the sky, at the humongous flying warship that was emitting terrifying noises. Looking up from below, they could only see the strange bottom of the ship with densely packed gun barrels, as well as 8 huge propellers that were stirring up strong winds, causing the nearby treetops to sway left and right. From below they could also see the huge golden eagle at the bow of the ship. This thing was almost identical to the eagle head on Eagle's Nest Mountain. Rangers with better eyesight would be able to see the terrifying 4 decks of the ship from the side. At this moment, the muzzle of every cannon had already been opened, and the lion emblem of the Alliance could clearly be seen on the cannons above the muzzle. None of the elves here were mediocre. Most of them were veterans who had experienced the second and third battles at the Dark Portal. The weaker rookies would have their throats slit in an instant when facing the ogres, who were also adept at forest warfare. It wouldn't have been obvious before the war, but only after experiencing continuous wars would the higher-ups of the elves realize how much the elves, with their long lifespans and low fertility rate, were at a disadvantage in wars where human lives were worthless. This was a war between the elves and the ogres that had lasted for more than 6,000 years. Both sides were extremely familiar with each other. It wasn't that the elves couldn't use magic to flatten the ogres, but the ogres could also ask shamans to let evil and powerful spirits possess them, and use a method similar to God's descent to perish together with the elven archmages. It wasn't that Queen Sylvie hadn't thought of using the dwarves' mechanized troops to deal with the ogres, but the ogres' territory was too disgusting. It was a mountain forest with undulating mountains and steam tanks couldn't enter at all. Until now, Duque gracefully bowed to Aurelia in a noble manner. "Greetings. Respected Troll War heroine Lady Aurelia, may I have the honor of inviting you to witness the complete destruction of the Amani Empire?" The destruction of the Amani Empire? With her beautiful appearance, Aurelia had lost count of how many gorgeous and sweet words of praise she had heard from handsome men in the first half of her life. But she had never heard an invitation like Duque's, which made her blood surge and every cell in her body excited. How many years had she been guarding the borders? How many companions, how many juniors she had high hopes for, had been slaughtered by the ogres, and they couldn't even retrieve their mutilated corpses. She was the heroine of the Troll War. She was also a witness to this terrible war. She hated evil and she hated these Amani ogres even more. Facing Duque's invitation, she didn't gracefully place her slender fingers on it. Instead, she hugged Duque and her fiery red lips landed on Duque's forehead, face and lips like raindrops. Finally, she suddenly stopped and gave Duque a deep kiss that lasted for a minute as a response to his invitation. The elves were stunned and then they smiled in understanding. Who knew that the greedy Duque would shamelessly extend an invitation to Queen Sylvie after tasting the lips of the elves' goddess? "Great Queen of Sindorii, what about you?" Queen Sylvie put her hands on her hips and said calmly, "Yes, I'll go." This was too far apart. Duque's face fell. Of course the elves were secretly happy. Who knew that in the whisper of the wind, Queen Sylvie would secretly swear, "Little bastard, if you can really exterminate the Amani trolls, along with the favor from last time, I'll just wear the set of maid clothes that you gave me, that I'm extremely ashamed of." Hip-length maid outfit, black silk, long legs, lace. Oh, and a real queen would wear it for him. Duque was so excited that he was about to go crazy. He immediately put on a sanctimonious act. The group rode on the flashy pureblood dragon eagles, followed by Lord Thema and the others who were riding normal dragon eagles, and flew to the Heaven Breaker. Magni went up to them first. "Welcome, beautiful elven ladies. Alright, are you ready to trample the Amani Empire under your feet?" Hundreds of high-level elves nodded in unison. Yes. Chapter 1237. It's time. Those damned long ears have lost the protection of the humans. They're nothing but prey for the Amani warriors. Muster your courage and fight. Victory belongs to us, the Amani. On the platform, the new leader of the Amani trolls, Dakara, was giving a passionate speech. The previous leader, Zujin, had been captured by the elves and then executed prematurely under the covert instigation of a certain fellow with the surname Du. The Amani trolls had fallen into a state of chaos for 10 years. Eichelson, who had the soul of the White Eagle, Nararak, who had the evil spirit of the Great Bear, and the other powerful trolls refused to give way. It was only recently that a new powerhouse who had inherited almost all of Zujin's skills, Dakara, took over. He reunited the chaotic Amani tribes. The trolls did not need any reason to fight the elves. The blood feud between them had long been engraved in their bloodlines, branded in the depths of their souls. All the Eridar Gemini had to do was to disguise themselves as a forest troll with a similar bloodline and spread the message of, all races are attacking the Alliance. That was enough to convince these simple-minded fellows to attack the Alliance at the most opportune time. It could be said that the Amani trolls had succeeded in dragging down the Alliance's forces. This success had also led to the Alliance's most terrifying counterattack today. A strange roar that many Amani trolls found unfamiliar came from the horizon, and the sky suddenly darkened. It was a gigantic flying warship. It was so huge that it looked like a small mountain flying in midair. Unfortunately, the clear man-made traces on its body made the Amani trolls understand that this thing had nothing to do with the gods. It had to be said that most trolls were pathetic creatures. From the era of the Darkness Empire to the present day, the troll civilization had not improved at all in the past 25,000 years. Primitive and ignorant. Faced with the flying warship that was more than 500 meters above the ground, some trolls actually bowed to the sky, and some nervously struck their gongs as a warning signal. However, the signals transmitted by the gongs were all over the place. Some said that the enemy was coming from the south, while others said that they were coming from the east, west, and north. Dakara was so angry that he stomped his feet. Shoot down that blasphemous thing. It had to be said that Dakara's attack was not entirely unreliable. At 500 meters, ordinary trolls would not be able to throw themselves that high even if they broke their arms. However, the range of a commander-tier fellow was obviously different. Eichelson, who possessed the eagle soul, summoned a flock of mountain eagles to soar into the sky. Gale, who could summon dragonhawks, sent a flock of dragonhawks with flame bombs. There was also Dakara, who possessed both strength and strength. Their attacks were definitely above average. Unfortunately, because of a certain someone's death, the Heavenbreaker had changed from a twin-propeller engine to an 8-propeller engine. Its tonnage had also directly changed from a cruiser to an aircraft carrier. Naturally, the Heavenbreaker's defense also increased. The Heavenbreaker's defense was definitely at the level of a main city. The attacks of the three troll powerhouses had only just risen to a height of 200 meters when they collided with the ice barrier that was fixed to the Heavenbreaker. As long as the mana supply wasn't interrupted, any projectile that entered within 300 meters of the Heavenbreaker would be forcibly slowed down. Then they ran into a power grid formed by 12 pylons at the bottom of the ship with lightning magic. Then there were the 36 barrage cannons. Of course, this thing couldn't be a real concentrated cannon. This thing was similar to the machine guns that could only be moved by human hands during World War I. Only it was more primitive and thicker. 24 gun barrels that were nearly 2 meters long and could fit an infant's fist were arranged on a huge drum. By continuously moving one of the gun barrels to the position of the scope, the automatic trigger would be pulled to activate what could be read as a bullet or a cannonball. When all 24 gun barrels had been fired, a specially made disc would be used to reload all 24 gun barrels at once. Although 24 shots would be enough to kill them, the dense and continuous firing, coupled with the attack power of the death knell. Against the slowed mountain eagles and dragonhawks, it was as simple as using a shotgun to shoot turkeys. Bang, 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 bang. Following the short and orderly sounds of the cannons, a large group of troll could only watch as the creatures they were so proud of were turned into sieves. Broken limbs, innards, blood and feathers rained down like rain of blood. No. Dakara wailed. On the Heavenbreaker, the Windrunner sisters and the other high-ranking elves were led by Duque and Magni to the lowest level. This is. Queen Sylvanas looked at the metal objects that were shaped like rugby balls and larger than bathtubs. She was a little confused. Bombs for aerial attacks. Duque pursed his lips. Like the cannonballs for steam tanks? No, these are simpler in terms of craftsmanship. Of course, because they're simple, we can put more explosives in them. At this point, Magni and Duque looked at each other and smiled. Then, a dwarf king and a human commander smiled slyly at the same time. The two raised their hands and high-fived each other, shouting in unison, "Explosion! That's art." Duque clapped again, attracting the attention of the high-ranking elves. "All right, my dear elven allies, you can write the names of your sacrificed friends and family on the cannonballs. Then let these named cuties send the trolls to hell." It had to be said that this was a good idea. Picking up the grease pens that Duque had prepared, the elves began to write names, blessings and curses on the polished cannonballs. 5 minutes later, The elves watched from a safe distance as the Heavenbreaker's lowest hatch slowly opened. "Begin dropping the bombs," Magni ordered. This was a vertical drop that couldn't even be considered a dive bomb. Even a 500-pound bomb couldn't be blown by the wind. It wasn't just the Alliance. Even the trolls stared dumbfoundedly at the huge metal bombs falling from the sky. "Attack!" Dakra yelled. Wooden spears began to hurl at the free-falling bombs. But was there any use in that? In less than 3 seconds the entire Zul Aman camp was rocked by an earth-shattering explosion. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The deafening sound could be heard even from the elven camp 50 kilometers away. Most of the elves on the Heavenbreaker stared dumbfounded at the devastation beneath their feet. Because they had come from the sky, they had easily passed through the trolls' meticulously laid traps and defensive lines. So, when the bombs landed, everyone could clearly see the troll city, which had stood at the south of Long Song Forest for more than 5,000 years, instantly falling into the abyss of destruction. The 500-pound bombs easily blasted a terrifying crater that was more than 5 meters deep and 20 to 30 meters wide. If it were used as a 10-meter-high diving pool, it would be as easy as pouring water into it. Chapter 1238. All sorts of miscellaneous items were sent flying into the air. Rows of wooden and thatched houses suffered the same fate as the stone palace. In the face of the explosion, they too collapsed and were sucked into the shockwaves of the explosion. When the seemingly sturdy stone palace that gave them a sense of security was easily destroyed like a thatched hut, every troll finally realized that the shadow of death had been hanging over their heads. Regardless of whether they were soldiers or civilians, the trolls were in a state of panic. They were like rats that had to flee in the face of a flood, leaving the buildings and running for their lives. But no matter how fast their legs were, how could they outrun the airships that were carpet-bombing the skies? This time, Duque had not only brought the Heavenbreaker, but also the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman. There were also 2 less technologically advanced airships, the Little Boy and the Fatty, that were used for bombing. These 2 bombardment airships looked a little like a big-bellied goldfish. Apart from the 2 huge propellers, the only other thing was a fat hull. But in terms of bomb capacity, these 2 bombardment airships were no less than the Heavenbreaker. As they slowly advanced at a speed of 30 kilometers per hour, they dropped 250, 500 and 1,000 pounds of bombs like fish ovulating eggs. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk. It was an earth-shattering shock. It was a deafening explosion. No matter how fast the trolls' legs were, they could not outrun the shockwaves of the explosion. Their escape was just to delay their deaths. Along with the unceasing tremors, everything about the Amani troll empire was erased from the land of Zul Aman. Who cared if you were a brave warrior? A powerful being possessed by a powerful animal spirit? A sturdy stone totem pole? It was Xiao Qiao who was too weak to even stand up to a gust of wind. Everything was destroyed in the face of this overwhelming destructive power. In the next instant, the fire soared into the sky and the ground caved in. The Zul Aman, which had been built on a high hill for drainage purposes, was flattened by this terrifying chain of explosions. Standing on the high platform, the chief of the Amani troll empire, Dakra, was completely stunned. He stood there in a daze watching the scene unfold. He even forgot to dodge. In his dreams, Zwaman would become the capital of the revived Amani Empire. But now, before this dream city could be expanded, it had already started to disappear in the long river of history. So what if he survived? His people, all the elites of the Amani clan, had died in front of him. As the last direct bloodline of the Amani royal family, the demise of the Amani clan meant that the revival of the Amani Empire had come to an end. No, this can't be true. I must be dreaming. Dakra muttered to himself as if he had gone mad. Chief, hurry up and run. The Amani clan is finished. The warlock Lord Malakas pounced over and tried to pull Dakra away. But at this time, 2 bombs the size of a small house fell from the sky and landed on the largest altar. Bang! The explosion of a 1,000-pound bomb would definitely shake the earth and mountains. In an instant, Dakra's giant bear incarnation was destroyed. Once the bear incarnation that could greatly strengthen his armor disappeared, his remaining 3 incarnations were actually fragile. Suddenly a few more bombs fell. This time Dakra did not take it head-on. He transformed into a lynx and tried to dodge. Who knew that he would suddenly find that his movements, which had already become incomparably agile, suddenly slowed down. To the onlookers this was already in slow motion. Who is it? The only reply he got was the explosion of the bombs. Boom! Dakra's head spun from the explosion. His ears were filled with an ear-piercing buzzing sound. His vision was blurred and he could not see clearly. But in his daze he felt that there were no more bombs falling. His instincts told him that a powerful being was descending from the sky. Die! Dakara threw out a rusty machete covered in blood. The funny thing was that his dizziness was so strong that he actually threw the machete at Malaka's head, almost killing his #1 fighter in an instant. Ah! The next moment he heard the Warlock Lord's tragic cry. His vision became a little more normal, and he was immediately shocked to see that Malaka's body was like a porcupine pierced with arrows. In that instant the Warlock Lord could not be any more dead. Without any hesitation, Dakara used his whirlwind slash. That's right. Since there was no one around him, he might as well attack indiscriminately. He would definitely hit anyway. That was how it should have been. Unfortunately, a ray of golden sword light and a ray of lightning sword light slashed toward him at the same time. Dakara instinctively used his epic-grade machete to meet them. The problem was, those two swords were divine weapons. Dakara was not strong enough to begin with. Moreover, he was not in his best condition after the explosion. He was unable to unleash his full combat power. In the face of the majestic and invincible divine weapons, his epic-grade machete was shattered by the two rays of sword light. With a loud bang, the two rays of sword light flashed past. Dakara's legs below his knees were gone. He knelt heavily on the ground. All of this happened in an instant. A single slash easily broke through his whirlwind chop, and the light from the sword easily shattered his weapon, slicing off Dakara's calf. Ha! Dakara yelled as he waved his arms. His left hand was infused with the strength of the mountain eagle, while his right was infused with the soul of the dragon hawk. Together, he struck the figure in the blue and white robes in front of him. Oh, lightning and fire? What a coincidence, me too. Dakara had once used the lightning of the mountain eagle to kill 13 high-level elven rangers, and the flames of the dragon hawk to burn 9 elven mages to death. He was very confident in his own strength. Having confidence was a good thing, but in the face of a higher level of mystery, everything was nothing. Oh, righteousness. Ah! Dakara let out the most agonizing howl he had ever made in the battle. His left hand, which used lightning, was instantly charred by the stronger lightning, while his right hand, which used fire, was slowly burned away inch by inch, leaving behind only his blackened bones. In less than 10 seconds, the great Amani chief Dakara had been reduced to a human scoundrel. Two powerful armored hands pressed down on him, one on the left and the other on the right, trying to force him to kneel on the ground. Even so, he struggled with all his might, straightening his body and trying to bite down on those two hands with his fangs. Just then a voice rang out. Nice to meet you. I am Duke Marcus, the last destroyer of the Amani Empire. As he spoke, Duque took a step forward and stomped heavily on Dakara's mouth. Chapter 1239. Dakara's expression changed to one of ferocious ecstasy. Trolls were not ogres after all. The two large fangs in their mouths were merely ornaments. What really tore flesh apart were the fangs within. However, they were only average and not even comparable to carnivorous creatures like sharks. The hands of the two holy knights were not so easy to bite. Just the high-quality epic-level gauntlets alone were enough to knock out his own teeth. To Dakara, Duque daring to step on him while wearing cloth boots was no different from courting death. So he did not hesitate to extend his neck and bite down. Who knew? Just a moment ago in Dakara's eyes, Duque's leg was no different from a chicken's leg. In the next second, when Duque infused his leg with divine power, it became something completely different in his field of vision and perception. It was as hot as lava, as violent as lightning, as dark as the convergence of all the evil in the world. Dakara's poor knowledge made it impossible for him to understand how this could happen. Bite with his teeth? What kind of joke was that? Even if his teeth were as sharp as a shark's, how could they possibly block this heavy kick that could topple mountains and overturn the heavens and earth? With a loud thud, Dakara let out a muffled groan as his stick-like body fell backwards, lying pathetically on the ground. His mouth full of teeth had turned into bloody shards that flew in all directions. Especially the two long fangs that were unique to trolls. As they spun in midair, they were caught by two slender hands from different elves. Ah, the fangs of the last troll chief? Looking at the huge fangs that were drilled with many holes and adorned with troll teeth, Aurelia laughed. She laughed so hard that tears welled up in her eyes. Oh, sister, take good care of it. This is a souvenir that you can't buy even if you have the money. Queen Sylvanas smiled like a flower, her golden hair dancing in the wind. On the surface, Queen Sylvanas looked calm, but upon closer inspection, one could see that her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She was excited too. Think about it. For almost 7,000 years, the border conflicts between the trolls and the High Elves had never stopped. Every year, tens to thousands of elves died in territorial conflicts. Even though the elves had always had the upper hand with their runestones, the hatred between them was so deep that they had never understood each other. If Zul-Aman was destroyed, the trolls would lose their last base in the Dragonsong Forest. Without Zul-Aman's protection, even without the help of the Alliance, the Sin Doryai Kingdom had the ability to exterminate the trolls by themselves. Not to mention the fact that the flying ships had wiped out the main force of the Amani clan here. Servanaz's blood surged. Just thinking about it made him excited. What outsiders said was their business. Every elf would credit her, the new queen, with the achievement of wiping out the Amani trolls. It had nothing to do with the desire to rule. It was purely because it could dilute the mark left behind by Anastrian's millennia of rule. Only by erasing the influence of this elven traitor could Sindorii truly let go of this burden and continue to move forward, standing tall among the nations of the world. Duke smashed Dakra's teeth with a kick, and Gavinrad and Tyrion, who were on either side of him, pushed Dakra to the ground with his staff. Dakra could only use his strong chest muscles to receive Duke's foot. The kick was so heavy that every muscle in Dakra's back was pressed against the hard bricks of the altar. The sound of bricks shattering could be heard from his back. Fresh blood seeped out from all the wounds on his body, staining the stones red. Dakra roared, his face flushed red. His bones creaked and beads of sweat dripped down his face. He resisted with all his might. His pride, his noble status as the Amani chief, did not allow him to submit to this puny and weak human. However, Duke's kick was as heavy as 1,000 mountains. Dakra used all his strength but could not move his body, let alone break free. "Let go," Duke instructed softly. The two paladins immediately let go. In the next instant, most of Dakra's body was sealed in ice, leaving only his head. Because his neck was under the effect of the deceleration spell, he could only move in slow motion like a slow-motion camera. The great Amani trolls will never submit. As long as one of us is left, we will fight for all eternity. Dakra, who was suppressed beneath Duke's feet, could not get up at all. Even so, he continued to curse fiercely. "I know you want to die. I can grant you that wish," Duke said leisurely. "But not today. Today, even if the Burning Legion and the Calamity Army come together, they will not be able to save the Amani trolls. Just watch obediently, watch the last scene of your clansmen's lives." Dakra's face darkened and paled. Today was not just a great humiliation to him. It was the darkest and most terrifying despair. No matter how his people tried to hide, they could still be easily found. Innumerable elves swarmed over from all over the mountains, and the mountains near Zul-Aman were all decorated with their unique, intricately patterned war flags. The war songs of the elves rang out, reverberating in every nook and cranny of the forest. What he did not know was that in the second battle at the Dark Portal, the demon spirit warning system that had caused Zhu Jin's trolls to bleed had already been upgraded. The tracking system installed on the flying ships could easily detect any living being within a 3,000-meter radius, and shoot at them with fluorescent materials that could dissipate. In a forest battle, the greatest advantage was concealment. Whoever was found first would lose more than half their lives. Even without looking, the experienced Dakra could tell from the sounds that his tribesmen were running for their lives, while the elves were shooting deadly arrows into the hearts and skulls of the trolls as though they were on a safari. This was the trolls' only weakness, which was its super regenerative ability. Dakra finally broke down. He had once been a high and mighty chief. Even in the most difficult times for his people, his strength had still soared. His strength and status were enough for him to look down on all life. Who dared to disrespect him? But today his strength was useless. His base had been destroyed and he had even been captured by a human wizard. He could not even save a single one of his men. Dakra lost his composure and shouted in the common language he had once looked down on, "Why? Those long-eared creatures are the invaders. Why must the Amani trolls be destroyed?" What? Duke's lips curled into a mysterious smile. It's hard to say who was right and who was wrong in the past. The Amani trolls must be destroyed simply because you were on the wrong side. Chapter 1240. If one really had to say who was right and who was wrong, it would really be a mess. Not only did the High Elves snatch the trolls' territory, but all the other races in Azeroth were also fighting for the trolls' territory. After all, during the era of the Darkness Empire, almost all of ancient Kalimdor was the territory of two trolls. Just the Amani Empire alone was about half the size of the Eastern Kingdoms. To be fair, even Duke didn't feel comfortable destroying such an ancient country. Was a pity? You Amani trolls shouldn't have sided with the evil faction that seeks to destroy the world of Azeroth, Duque said in a low voice. Yes, even the dark spear trolls of Woking had defected to the Horde. Duque could turn a blind eye and allow the Amani trolls to continue existing. He could even act as a mediator to resolve conflicts between the two sides. Just like how the Night Elves had exiled the High Elves. No matter what, to fight the Burning Legion head-on, they would need as many cannon fodder as they could get. It was a pity that the Amani trolls had sided with the wrong side, so Duque didn't mind using his position to avenge his woman and wipe out the entire Amani race. Dakra was sweating profusely and trembling all over. He was already heavily injured, and now being stepped on by Duque and sealed in ice, he was so enraged that blood gushed out of his lungs and dripped down from the corner of his mouth. He suddenly began to hate his powerful regenerative abilities as a troll. If he was an elf with a weaker body, he might have already breathed his last. Yet this body kept him alive and didn't let him die. And he had to watch as his own people were slaughtered and his home burned to the ground. Kill me, Duke Marcus. Kill me right now. Dakra howled. Kill you now? That's what I was thinking. But I've changed my mind. Duque crossed his arms and said slowly, it's too easy to kill you. But the opportunity to show the Alliance's might doesn't come often. You? At this moment, Dakra finally understood what it meant to be unable to live or die. With a single glance from Duque, someone dragged Dakra away to keep an eye on him. Dear, I'll leave it to you. Duque smiled at the Windrunner sisters. The three Windrunner sisters felt that they should be extremely grateful to Duque. However, after carefully experiencing it, they realized that this was not gratitude, but absolute worship, even to the point of faith. 3 days later, the streets of New Silvermoon City were empty. Almost all the elves had gathered at the new arena. This was not extravagant, brutal pleasure. This arena was built after Queen Sylvia came to power, and it could hold up to 50,000 spectators. Apart from special festivals, there would be elven warriors personally fighting every weekend in order to arouse the martial spirit of Sindorii. Today, the elves gathered together to celebrate the destruction of the Amani trolls. Several elven experts, including Queen Sylvie, personally took the field and killed several Amani leaders, including Dakra. In the VIP seats, Illyria couldn't help but reveal an intoxicated expression as she listened to the loud shouts of the elves. Duque said, I thought you'd take the field. Aurelia smiled. Second sister needs something like reputation more than I do. Plus, I'm the general of Silver Dawn now, not Sindorii. Duque smiled. Reputation was something that couldn't be seen or touched. You only knew how good it was when you needed it. It was hard to say whether the elves hated the Amani trolls or the scourge that destroyed Silvermoon City the most. The elves' lifespan of thousands of years was too long. To them, the tragic deaths of their friends and family were like yesterday. After Sylvanas became queen, she was able to completely destroy one of the elves' two greatest enemies, the Amani trolls. It could be said that from that moment on, the elves truly recognized her as their queen. Aurelia suddenly sighed. I fought against the Amani trolls for 3,000 years, and suddenly they were destroyed by a new invention from the humans and dwarves. What a strange feeling. I'm thinking if the High Elves were the ones who fell behind and were destroyed. Sasha blinked. If that really happened, what would you do to us, Duque? Would you choose to help the trolls fight the elves? Duque was speechless. Please, the difference in looks is enough for me to abandon the trolls and become an elf lover. As for Sasha, Duque directly teased her. Sorry, unless my cute Sasha runs off to become a troll with 2 canine teeth, I won't choose the trolls. Sasha's face instantly turned red. I don't have canine teeth, much less become a troll. Duque decisively replied, then as long as you and your sister are in the elven race, even if the trolls are 10,000 years more advanced than the elves, I will still choose the elves. Looks are justice. My women are justice. It's good that I know this. Of course I can't say it like that. Aurelia loved him deeply, but she was also a righteous woman. If it came down to it, she would have to choose between him and her people. That choice would definitely make Duque heartache. Luckily, he wouldn't have that chance. Duque took a deep breath. There's a saying among humans, personality determines fate. I feel that the characteristics of a race determine their achievements and future. Perhaps there are many what-ifs in history, but there is only one final result. Since a race makes such a choice under the influence of both internal and external forces, there will be an inevitable result. Aurelia didn't say anything and listened quietly. I have no intention of denying or distorting history, but I think that whether it's the wisdom of those in power or the will of fate, since humans and elves are progressing bit by bit, this is the achievement of history. When our achievements surpassed those of the trolls who stood on the opposite side of history, everything was set in stone. That's why when humans and elves first allied 2,800 years ago, the trolls had no chance of winning. Especially today when the individual strength of the trolls can no longer surpass that of magic and technology, it's even more so. The martial arts that you've practiced for decades have become meaningless? How sad. Aurelia sighed. Perhaps. If you want to move forward, if you want your race to continue, you have to lose something. For example, outdated traditions. Duque pointed out this point. In Duque's opinion, at least the exaggerated and arrogant elves were bad habits that had to be abandoned. Aurelia nodded. Yes, it is indeed time for the elves to change. What we need is something more simple and unpretentious. Chapter 1241. In the twisting nether, in the Burning Legion's new fortress, the Eridar twins were huddled together as they convulsed. They were suffering the most terrible punishment. Other than their skulls, there were countless needle-like objects that kept injecting low-purity dark energy into their bodies. On the other side, a huge, strange, octopus-like tentacle was sucking the dark energy out of the holes in their skulls. This was forcefully reducing their power and in the process, giving them the greatest pain. It was a classic double punishment of the soul and body. Suddenly, a huge red shadow with a blazing aura descended. It was the commander of the Burning Legion, Kill Jaden. Something must have been flipped, and the convulsing Gemini fell to the ground. Unable to catch her breath, the Gemini immediately knelt down to thank Kill Jaden. Thank you, Great Master. Thank you for your mercy. The Gemini said in unison. I hate mercy. Kill Jaden's voice rumbled. Because mercy means that my idiot underlings have messed up the plan, and I have no other replacements to replace them. Can your stupid brains even begin to understand the feeling of being twice as angry? The Gemini's beautiful and charming body was trembling uncontrollably. Suppressing the fear in their hearts, the Gemini nodded like chicks pecking at grains. I am very disappointed with the dimensional trap plan. You have placed your hopes on the traitors of the Legion and the uncontrollable false gods. It is wrong in itself. The Gemini kowtowed and begged for mercy. Next time I hope to see a perfect result. I am not interested in the process. I only want the result. If it fails again, I think many lords will be interested to see how I put the two of you, who claim to be beautiful, into the body of a green-skinned lesser demon with eternal transfiguration. After saying that, Kill Jaden's huge shadow that was enough to fill the entire hall disappeared, leaving only two female demon lords who were trembling non-stop, still trapped in the deepest fear. The lesser demons were the lowest and most lowly existence in the Burning Legion. They were not even qualified to be cannon fodder. No demon would care about the life and death of a lesser demon, including any other individual of the lesser demon race. Which Void Duke didn't kill their way through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. He could even become an overlord. Just this identity alone was enough to make him the target of envy and hatred from billions of demons. If Gemini really fell to the point of becoming an inferior demon, the number of people who would do violence to them could definitely fill up any planet. The twins looked at each other. There was no need for words. They had known each other for more than 20,000 years, and they could understand each other's thoughts with just a glance. Apart from their deepest fear, they also felt a strong sense of unwillingness. In their eyes, the key to their failure this time was that Azeroth's protective shield was still strong. Although any Void Lord could sense that the magic circle left behind by the Pantheon Titan had weakened, it was still functioning well. At the very least, this could be considered an experiment. It was obviously Kill Jaden's mistake, but unfortunately, the Master is always right. Once there was a mistake, it must be the servant's fault. The twins could only take the blame for this failure. Anyway, the Eridar tribe would never lack cunning and capable female demons. Duque didn't know about the tragedy of the Eridar twins, nor would he care about it. He watched Angela's monster movie with the magic mirror while ordering the air fleet to head south to support William. Stormwind didn't have a ranger team that could fight against the jungle trolls. This time, William used a more simple and violent method. Stranglethorn Vale's terrain was relatively gentler than Zwaman's, which allowed the dwarven steam tanks to be put to good use. Furthermore, the three Bronzebeard brothers had always been fond of William. For this southern expedition to Zul, Gurub, Magni brought out the strongest, lightning tank army for William to command. The cannons were roaring, and the sound of explosions that symbolized destruction reverberated throughout Stranglethorn Vale. The dwarves used the cannons that Duque had taught them to plow a 5-kilometer-wide path of death in the northern region of Stranglethorn Vale. What? Concealment? That didn't exist. Unless the trolls could instantly turn their skin from green to black like the scorched earth like a chameleon, even if they could survive the terrifying volley of cannons, they wouldn't be able to pass through the line of death that followed. The front row was made up of 3 layers of human swordsmen, shield-bearers, and pikemen. The middle row was made up of dwarven musketeers and harpooneers standing on steam-armored vehicles. The back row was made up of a mix of mortars and archers. With the addition of the Dalajan mages, no trolls would be able to pass through this 50-meter-long zone of death. At night, the flares and expensive magic searchlights lit up the entire front line as if it was daytime. The trolls didn't stand a chance at all. Even if the trolls sent out the Gurubashi berserkers, which were as large as the ogres, it would only increase the number of targets. The new soldiers all expressed that they could shoot live targets, and their experience points increased rapidly. The battle that had been going on for the past few days was more like a planned massacre than a battle. However, the alliance's luck ended when they advanced to Zul, Gurub. As one of the most important cities of the ancient Troll Empire, Zul, Gurub's terrain could be said to be easy to defend and difficult to attack. Between the endless mountains, there was a river that wasn't considered deep but was abnormally turbid. There were nightmarish things everywhere. In every bush, there could be several or even dozens of venomous snakes jumping out to take your life. Every object that looked like dead wood by the river could very well be a ferocious crocodile. Every time the soldiers went to fetch water, they had to tremble in fear. Inside the river, there were piranhas that could gnaw a living person into a boneless, fleshless human in a minute. However, the mechanized infantry division that the Alliance was so proud of couldn't be deployed in such a terrain. William, Bulang, and the other higher-ups of the Alliance were simply at their wits' end with the current situation. Yet, every day there were close to 100 casualties among the soldiers. The morale of the Alliance dropped at a speed visible to the naked eye. Magni doted on William so much that he didn't even inform Duque. He secretly brought the newly built flying warship Iron Hammer to Zul, Gurub in an attempt to replicate Duque's success with the Amani trolls. It was a pity that Magni and William had suffered a huge loss this time. A group of bats appeared. There were more than 10,000 of them, each the size of a pony. This terrifying number, coupled with the presence of the high-level troll priest, Yekrik Iron Hammer, crashed on its first voyage. More than 800 dwarves and human soldiers died along with it. Chapter 1242. In Stranglethorn Vale's Alliance command, the higher-ups of the Alliance were debating endlessly. "Can't we just blow up all the ravines?" William asked. Bulang rolled his eyes at William. "First, gunpowder requires money. Second, even if we had so much gunpowder, you wouldn't be able to pay for it even if you spent 100 years of Stormwind's taxes. Third, this is all damned muddy ground. Heavy cannons can't be transported in at all. The farthest cannons can only shoot for a little more than 12,000 meters, and after 3,000 meters, who knows where the cannonballs will go. Aerial bombardment wouldn't work. There were a few other methods left, but they would all require a huge price in lives and casualties. This might not even guarantee the successful destruction of Zul, Gurub. This was a consequence that none of the countries in the Alliance could bear. Moreover, after fighting for so long, the Alliance had only seen 2 or 3 high-ranking priests. The enemy's boss, the evil god Hacker, was nowhere to be seen. William punched the wall in frustration. His exaggerated wrist strength caused a hole to appear in the cement wall. "William, the Heaven Breaker is on its way. Actually, Valilla tried to comfort William. William suddenly turned around, his eyes bloodshot from staying up for days and nights. "Valilla, you don't understand. Of course we can give all the most important tasks to Uncle Duque. But what if Uncle Duque isn't around one day? What if we're the only ones left to save the world? I'm not a child anymore. I have to learn to deal with problems independently." Valilla opened her mouth to say something, but Breer Bearskin pulled his old partner back and shook his head at her. Valilla was silent. At this moment, William, who had suddenly stretched his hand out of the cement wall, pinched the cement powder in his hand. As a temporary building, the cement wall of the command wasn't completely dry. It was supposed to be extremely hard and could even be used as a city wall, but now it seemed a little sluggish. When he pinched it hard, it turned into powder. "Wait, Uncle Lang, you said that your heavy cannons only lack a strong base? What if I can provide an extremely strong base for the dwarven artillery?" William seemed to have thought of something. Bulang rolled his eyes. "As long as you can get that evil god into the firing range of the artillery, my men will help you blow it up into the sky. But how are you going to get my cannon through so many complicated swamps? Uncle Bulang, let me try something else. I don't want you to give me 10,000 tons of explosives. I want 10,000 tons of cement. William slammed the table. Since the Doomsday Army can pollute the Soterer River to block the lifeline of Lordaeron, why can't we use cement to fill every river, every gully and every inch of mud in Zul, Europe? William waved his arms excitedly. His assumption was too exaggerated. It sounded a little whimsical, but when he thought about it carefully it seemed possible. For a moment even Boulang was stunned. The Alliance doesn't seem to have that much cement? Boulang could only mutter. William's expression froze upon hearing this answer. At this moment, Duque's voice came at the right time. We didn't have it in the past, but it's different now. Duque led Magni, the 3 Windrunner sisters, and the other higher-ups of the Alliance into the command center. Uncle Duque, you've arrived with the Heaven Breaker? William's face was filled with obvious surprise. Yes, your idea is indeed exaggerated. But since all the conventional tactics don't work, why don't you try your strange idea? Why do you have to restrict your thoughts with so-called common sense and principles? William, I'm on your side this time. Duque smiled as he walked over and patted William's shoulder. Then, cement, Duque smiled. Cement has always been a scarce resource in the Alliance. Almost every city's reconstruction can't do without it. However, the Alliance's supply of cement has always been very low. The main reason is that we had to import the raw material for cement from the Ungoro crater in the Kalimdor continent, limestone, which is mainly volcanic ash. What about now? Boulang sensitively noticed the key point in Duque's words. Duque clapped his hands and said an exciting piece of news. Although the Alliance has flooded the molten core according to the agreement with the Hydaxia water elemental creatures, we have never said that we will give up on developing the Black Rock Mountain. With the Black Rock Mountain, which was once a nightmare, the Alliance can easily produce 1 million tons of cement per month. 1 million tons? This shocking figure made all the higher-ups of the Alliance ecstatic. The higher-ups of the Alliance who had used reinforced concrete would no longer be interested in walls made of stone and mud. The hardness of the two was not on the same level. Furthermore, traditional stone walls had the problem of being too heavy. As long as some of the pillars of the wall were destroyed, the weight of the wall would crush it. Originally, because the cement production had always been too low, they had no choice but to use the best steel on the cutting edge. No one had thought that there would be such a benefit after conquering the molten core. How could they not be happy? Zul, Gurub was very large. As the capital of the Gurubashi Empire, one of the 2 troll empires, Zul, Gurub occupied a very large area. Surrounded by huge walls that were somewhat trapezoidal, Zul, Gurub was more than 300 kilometers wide from east to west, and more than 500 kilometers from north to south. If they attacked the core area forcefully, it was unknown how many people would die. But now, with William's strategy, the Alliance could obviously push forward layer by layer. Duke laughed. That's a stupid idea. If we could use money and manpower to solve hackers' problem, we wouldn't be able to do so. If we can use money and manpower to solve hackers' problem, then the price is obviously worth it. Before rushing to the Sin Dorii Kingdom, the limestone mining of the molten core had actually already begun. Duque directly made the air fleet, which was originally rushing back to the Iron Stove Castle to replenish their ammunition, change their route to the Black Rock Mountain and transport a large amount of limestone over. The Alliance used a full half a month to slowly push the front line to the waterfall a little north of the main entrance of Zul, Gurub. That was an important source of the Zul, Gurub water system. Hundreds of mixers were lined up on top of the waterfall. According to Duque's instructions, they slowly poured the mixed cement slurry according to the proportion. The cement slurry seemed very thin, but under the huge amount of water from the waterfall, it was instantly washed away to who knows where. But after 3 days they could clearly see the results. The river in the distance seemed to have become narrower for no reason, and the water flow became more rapid. But the waterways also became distorted. On the 5th day the main route began to change. On the 7th day 2 lakes mysteriously dried up. On the 14th day, all the Gurubashi trolls felt that something was wrong. Chapter 1243. At the end of February 22nd, year 22 of the Dark Portal, Zul, Gurub was supposed to have a high water season. The heavy rainfall directly caused every river in the troll capital to flow terrifyingly fast. This was why the Alliance army had been helpless before. Now the amount of water in the river suddenly became like a dry year. Looking at the continuous rain in the sky, the trolls panicked. They all ran to ask Hacker's priests. The priests went to the high-ranking priests and even alarmed Hacker. The problem was that Hacker was the evil god of chaos. This kind of trivial matter in his eyes was not worth disturbing. In a rage, he swallowed many troll believers as sacrifices before he calmed down. Days passed and the amount of water decreased day by day. A month later, the trolls who had been defending the depths of Zul, Gurub finally discovered the problem. A large amount of white material flowed down from upstream, blocking up all the rivers. It also caused a large number of piranhas to die. Many amphibious creatures like the crocodiles died, and the ones that were alive were not much better off. Most of them were dying. Some troll hunters tried to dissect the crocodiles' corpses and found that the crocodiles' lungs were filled with a grayish-white material. The trolls finally panicked a little. On a hill near the main entrance to the west of Zul, Gurub, Duque stood with a group of Alliance powerhouses. They watched as the water of Zul, Gurub passed through a newly built temporary dam and was diverted into Lake Nafaridi through the former venture capital company's camp. The big shots of the Alliance were all filled with emotion. No one had thought that rivers could be used like this. Especially the dwarves and gnomes. Their eyes were filled with fanaticism as they looked at Duque's back. Once upon a time, all steam technology was viewed as heresy on this continent, and even in the entire world. After all, Azeroth was a world of swords and magic. Duque's appearance changed everything. Even the harshest and most conservative old nobles had to admit that the swords produced by a large dwarven factory in a month could supply the soldiers of an entire kingdom. The economic value of a train track was greater than that of 10,000 carriages. Now, even rivers could be changed, lakes could be drained, and even natural moats could be changed. What else couldn't technology do? If it wasn't for the fact that the weapons brought about by technology were still unable to defeat the most powerful mages and all kinds of special champions and monsters, this might have already become the steampunk world that Duque mentioned. Magni and the other dwarves were full of praises. Magni asked Duque, "Speaking of which, when did you become a water conservancy expert? How can you be sure that as long as there is enough cement, you can block the river?" Duque pursed his lips. Of course he knew. As an engineering student, he had seen too many brutal constructions by construction teams during his internship. For example, the workers would pour the leftover cement into the sewers for convenience. As a result, most of the sewers of the entire building were blocked. It was true that the water would wash away the cement, but a lot of the heavier cement would still be deposited in the river and slowly silted up, forming a dammed lake similar to earthquakes or volcanic activity that would block the valley and silt up the water. Now, Duque had used his engineering knowledge to divert away more than half of the water in Zul, Gurub. As a result, Zul Gurub would have no water to use, and the advancement of the Alliance's army would become smoother. Duque tapped his temple. Knowledge is power. During the 10 years in the Void, I read almost all the books in Karazhan. There are many ancient and alien knowledge that you guys will never have the chance to come into contact with in your lifetime. I don't care about the other books, but give us dwarves and gnomes a copy of the books on water conservancy. The conditions are negotiable. Okay. Duque's finger was pointing. Everyone knew that wherever Duque pointed, the mountains and rivers would change according to the wishes of mortals. In the legends, this was already a domain that only gods could touch. This was what made mortals the most excited. After everything was settled, Duque patted William's shoulder. "Alright, do as I say. We will probably be able to launch an all-out attack on Hacker's forces in the summer." "Understood." William nodded his head heavily. The problem of the trolls has troubled the previous kings of Stormwind for more than 2,000 years. Even though technology has advanced, don't expect to solve the problem of Zul, Gurub in a short period of time. Don't compare yourself to the Amani trolls. After all, the Amani trolls only have a bunch of divine creatures with a bit of divinity standing behind them, while the Kubarash trolls in Zul, Gurub have a true god behind them. Even if it's a third-rate evil god, it's still a true god. Once again confirming that his goal was to slay a god, William still felt a surge of excitement ignite in his blood. "Alright, I'll leave this place to you. I will bring the main forces of the various countries of Lordaeron to Silithus. Don't throw away the elites of our hometown." Duque laughed. "Don't worry, I will be very patient," William promised. Duque wasn't interested in Hacker. After all, a third-rate evil god that was weaker than Ragnaros didn't require Duque to personally deal with it. As long as they followed Duque's method and killed the high-ranking priests of Gurubashi one by one, Hacker's power would also be weakened. It would be the best for William to practice his skills. On the other side, because of Duque's plan, Kel, Thuzad had no choice but to use the Scourge army to fight against the Bugmen of Karaj. Now, there was almost an outcome. Previously they knew that they had been tricked. After all, both sides were really angry. It was impossible for them to continue to work together to deal with the Alliance and the Horde like before. However, Duque knew that the situation of the battle could change at any time. It was already a pleasant surprise that the two of them had been fighting for so long. Move out the Heaven Breaker. We will catch up with the main force of the Alliance. As early as January, the main force of the Alliance had already started the Western expedition. This time, the army that was preparing to attack Silithus was a huge force consisting of 350,000 soldiers and 400,000 logistical troops. Of course, the so-called 400,000 logistical troops were mostly Theramore soldiers and civilians. The 350,000 soldiers were divided into three parts. The first part was the Night Elves. They set off from the Feathermoon Fortress on the island in the southwest of the Kalimdor continent. The total force was about 50,000, but they were all elite sentries and druids. The second part was the Theramore army. Before the Night Elves joined the Alliance, Theramore was the bridgehead of the Alliance in Kalimdor. Theramore was far stronger than it had been in history. With Duque's intentional or unintentional refugee diversion and support, Theramore had already become a huge military city-state with 150,000 soldiers and 350,000 accompanying family members. This time, apart from leaving 20,000 troops, Theramore had almost turned out in full force. Chapter 1244. On the Heaven Breaker, the deafening hum of the propellers was blocked by a soundproof magic formation. In addition, when Duque was designing the Heaven Breaker's blueprint, he had repeatedly emphasized the soundproof layer. Sitting on the Heaven Breaker was not as bumpy and shocking as imagined. Instead, it was like sitting on a boat. On the deck at the stern of the Heaven Breaker was the meeting room. Looking at the bright sunshine outside the window and looking down at the drifting clouds below, the big shots of the Alliance who had never been on a flying battleship felt very novel. Because Turalian and the other three were missing, Mograine had not recovered from his serious injuries, and Solarian, Gina Goldsword, Sally Whitemane, and the others were assigned to William to fight against Hacker. The strongest combat power of the Alliance this time was much weaker than when they fought the Molten Core. This was something that could not be helped. On the other hand, if Duque had not thought of a way to make Kel, Thazad and Si Thun fight each other, the situation of the world would probably be worse than it was now. Suddenly the sky darkened, and a large group of huge black shadows shrouded the entire flying fleet. This immediately attracted the attention of the guards, but everyone heaved a sigh of relief after that. It was the giant dragon of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. Alexstrasza, the great life-giver, the Red Dragon Queen. Although her dragon form was much smaller than the Heaven Breaker, no one would doubt that the Heaven Breaker was a big toy in her eyes. The huge dragon body shrank rapidly, and when she slowly landed on the main deck, she was that hot and beautiful royal lady again. Hey, my little Dooku, did you think of me, your sister? Or did you forget about me after conquering this little female dragon? Alexstrasza teased Duque. Seeing the Red Dragon Queen Onyxia, who was in the form of Countess Katrana, shrank behind Duque like a mouse seeing a cat. Although she was petite in her human form, she could not hide no matter how much she shrank. Come out and show your face. You didn't do anything harmful to the Dragon Slumber Shrine. Just admit your mistake and the great Red Dragon Queen will forgive you. As Duque spoke, he pinched the back of Onyxia's neck, like a mother cat holding a disobedient kitten in its mouth. In the eyes of others, this was as normal as an older brother squeezing his younger sister's neck. However, in the eyes of the Red Dragon Queen, it had a different meaning. Even the back of Duke's neck was, "Ah, how interesting." A playful expression appeared on the red-haired mature woman's face. Onyxia felt as if she had been electrocuted. Whether it was the muscles on her face or her entire body, they were all unnaturally stiff. It was one thing to become Duque's mount, to be ridden day and night. Admitting defeat in front of his fellow Dragon Clan members was another matter altogether. In front of her dead brother, Onyxia didn't feel anything, perhaps because she thought that Nefarian would definitely die. At this moment he had to lower his head in front of the strongest dragon race, which was also the Black Dragon race's former nemesis. Firstly, he was displeased, and secondly, this was clearly a public execution. Duque was pinching her neck. This was a declaration of his ownership over her. The most important part of her body, the nape of her neck, was kneaded with a moderate amount of force. Onyxia felt like she was about to explode from the shame. No, she clearly wanted to resist and refused to admit her inferiority in front of Alexstrasza. However, her body was hot and her face was flushed red. Finally, Onyxia resigned herself to her fate and bowed to the Red Dragon Queen with the etiquette of a human maid. However, she spoke in the dragon language. When translated, the general meaning was, "Onyxia, the Sin Dragon under the command of the human Duke Marcus, greets your majesty." The dragons were arrogant. They boasted that they were the origin of all beasts, the existence at the top of the food chain. For her, who had once been enemies with the dragon slumber shrine, to admit that she was the servant of a lowly creature was actually difficult for her. Because it was too shameful, Onyxia already lowered her head as soon as she finished speaking. Well said. Duque pinched her neck and pulled her back. In the eyes of others, he stroked her neck as if he was petting a cat. How interesting. The playful expression on Alexstrasza's face became even more obvious. However, she quickly put on a serious face. This time, I want to represent the Dragon Slumber Shrine to discuss the matter of Silithus with the allied forces of the Alliance and the Horde. Can the Dragon Slumber Shrine send out troops this time? Duque asked. Yes, but not many. I took 500 draconic beasts and demi-dragon from Nozdormu. Together with the other 3 factions of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, it will be 1,000. Please understand, as we have been very busy in the Void battlefield, the Queen replied. Hearing this, the big shots of the Alliance all looked touched. After all, it was very rare for the Dragon Slumber Shrine to directly send out troops. Also, the Queen suddenly handed something that looked like a compass to Duque. Sense it yourself. Duque felt it and was dumbfounded. This wasn't a compass at all. It actually marked the status of the Red Dragon Queen, roughly divided into several levels. I'm very busy. If you dare to bother me, I'll reward you with dragon breath. Busy, not mortal destruction, don't call me. On duty, not mortal destruction, but I probably can't leave. Sound asleep, not world destruction, don't call me. A bit idle, call me if there's anything fun. For example, food. 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 Important things must be repeated 3 times. After looking at the 5th level, Duque rolled his eyes. Alexstrasza was still so capricious. But this thing was an upgraded version of Debt Collector Beats, right? Right now, her status was on duty. Phew. Duque exhaled. No matter what, thank you for the support of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. We mortals will work hard. Alright, I'm very busy. I'll leave it to you this time. The Red Dragon Queen came willfully and left willfully. She was just that cool. However, before she left, the words that came from the compass into Duque's spiritual world made Duque silent for a long time. If this world needs a black dragon to inherit the position of the dragon aspect, do you think you can trust Onyxia? To be honest, Duque didn't know the answer to this either. Planet Azeroth's protective magic circle was so powerful that it could even resist the power of Sargeras. There was a foundation for this, and that was the existence of the 5 dragon aspects. Duque had gotten rid of Nesario earlier than in history. Although this had weakened the power of the evil side, it had also given the demons more opportunities. If the position of the dragon aspect wasn't so important, there wouldn't have been so many dragon aspects in history. Duque shook his head and drove this thought out of his mind. Alright, now let's officially discuss how to deal with Naxxramas. Chapter 1245. Duque first took out a calendar. First of all, if there are no accidents, Naxxramas will regain mobility at 9 o'clock in the morning on March 11th, and the fortress will be able to fly again. Before Duque finished, Magni had already jumped up. Wait, Naxxramas isn't yours. How can you be so sure that it will regain mobility at this time? Duque looked at Magni as if he was a retard, which made the dwarf king feel guilty. Magni sat down and mumbled in a low voice, Fine. You guys who play with magic are all cunning. The whites of Duke's eyes rolled up. Alright little shorty, you've scolded all the mages. Come to think of it, I just accidentally said it once. Why do you guys remember this kind of sinister curse word so well? Of course, there was no need for Duque to do anything. The newly advanced Breaking Dawn mage Jaina stabbed the shorty in the butt with her ice sword, causing Magni to cry out in pain. Getting back to the main topic, Duque pressed his hands on the military table. As long as Kel'Thuzad doesn't break through to demigod level, he can't do anything to me. This is decided by the realm. Please don't worry too much. And so what if he becomes a demigod? Don't forget, Nefarian and Ragnaros also fell at our feet as demigods. Don't forget. Where did you get your top-grade equipment from? The spoils of war from killing a real demigod were really frighteningly rich. At this point, Magni touched his Balrog hammer, and then looked at Gavin Rad, who was hugging the wind sword as if he was hugging his lover, and laughed at the same time. Including Archimonde, the Alliance had already slaughtered 3 demigods. Duque continued, according to the intelligence, Naxxramas originally had a total of 15 or rather so many leaders. Then because of the Dalajan bombardment and the battle with Karaj, the most accurate intelligence now is that there are only 6 leaders left. Duque waved his hand, and Vanessa distributed the prepared reports to the big shots. The structural zone's structural giant Thaddeus, the military zone's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the spider zone's Black Witch Farina and the spider Meisner, then the frost dragon Saffron and the ice lich Kel Thuzad? Theon flipped through the report and looked at the introduction of the 6 leaders, as well as the frighteningly detailed characteristics and skills of the leaders. He couldn't help but purse his lips. The enemy had no secrets in Duque's eyes. The so-called god of prophecy was nothing more than this, right? Looking at Duque, he couldn't help but sigh. It's a good thing Duque is on our side. At the military conference table, Duque used magic projection to create the latest 3-dimensional projection of Naxxramas. Originally, Naxxramas had 4 districts, but now because the plague zone was completely destroyed by the Dalajan's main cannon bombardment, there are only 3 left. What we need to do is to kill the leaders of the remaining 3 districts as quickly as possible while Kel Thuzad is trapped. As quickly as possible? You mean we should split up? Tyron frowned. There weren't many strong alliance fighters participating in this battle, so why should they split up? Yes, there's a very, very important reason here. But I'm sorry I can't say it now. If you believe me, then please support me. If you don't believe me, then vote. The minority follows the majority, Duque said mysteriously. Everyone couldn't help but narrow their eyes. Aurelia seemed to have thought of something. What about the strong horde fighters? They will help us block the possible arrival of the Courage leaders when we attack Naxxramas. Then I have no objections. The so-called vote wasn't even a formality. This was no longer the time when the alliance was founded 21 years ago. At that time, Duque was inexperienced and young. Now, Duque's prestige and power in the alliance were absolute. Moreover, everyone trusted him 100%. Without any surprises, the big bosses decided to implement the plan of splitting up. At this time, Naxxramas could be said to be gloomy. The intelligent Undying only felt that the situation wasn't good, but it wasn't to the point where they would explode. Kel Thuzad couldn't help but feel lucky that the undead didn't have morale. They were undead, not blind. The Alliance, the Horde, and the Sleeping Dragon Temple had made such a big move. If they couldn't even find this, then they could just burn their own souls as fuel for the soul torch. But Kel Thuzad was helpless. At the height of the battle, he even thought of giving up Naxxramas and leading the army to escape. However, it wasn't that he didn't want to escape, but that he really couldn't. This was the desert region of Silithus. From the Courage Temple to the border of Silithus, the nearest place was 300 kilometers away. Let's not talk about the fact that low-level undead would quickly die under the sun, such as the rotten flesh of zombies. Even if they could only protect those who could use the power of darkness to protect their bodies and not die from the sun, it would still be very difficult. Silithus was full of huge insect nests. There were at least 1 million zergs in each of the large hives. If they gave up on the dangerous terrain of Naxxramas and exposed the undead army to the desert plains, destruction would be the only outcome. So Kel Thuzad was dragging it out, trying to drag it out until the fortress's floating system was fixed. However, even with his erudition and superb intelligence, he still couldn't deal with the vicious trap that Duque had left in the flying system. If he directly accessed the intelligent management system that originated from the Titan, questions such as, "What is the catchphrase of the Gale Sword Hero?" would pop up. Kel Thuzad didn't know who the Gale Sword Hero was. He casually answered one, and the system would tell him that the correct answer was, "Pretentious like the wind, always by my side." Kel Thuzad patiently listened to these kinds of questions that simply didn't give him a way out. In the end, there were a lot of questions, each one fresh and each one a pain in the ass. Not only did he feel that his intelligence had been seriously dragged down, but he also felt deeply humiliated. How could Duque play with the Titan creations that even the Burning Legion couldn't understand so smoothly? And he, Kel Thuzad, just couldn't. He didn't believe it. It had to be said that the great mages who could muddle their way to the Breaking Dawn level were all monsters with at least an IQ of more than 200, or some crazy cheating demon with a system. Kel Thuzad used a stupid method. He used painstaking effort to remove all the remaining willpower from the Titan creations. This was very similar to erasing all the formatting of a computer's hard drive. Without destruction there could be no construction. He destroyed all the programs and systems, and then reprogrammed the Naxxramas floating system according to his own will. Chapter 1246. Rewriting the program of a creation Titan's creation was definitely not a simple task. After a month of endless research, Thuzad finally figured out that what kept the fortress suspended in the sky depended on the east, south, west, north, center, plus the top and bottom too. There were a total of 7 things called void power furnaces. As a mage who specialized in necromancy, it was truly a thankless task for him to understand things on the scientific side. The most troublesome thing was that the power furnace that was originally located in the plague area was destroyed, which made the entire fortress lose its original balance. Even if the power furnace was operated according to the original design, Thuzad estimated that it was very likely that even if it flew, the fortress would continue to spin at high speed in the air. It would either fly to an unknown place or fall again. Naxxramas was very strong, but that was relatively speaking. If it fell from a high altitude again, it was estimated that if the fortress did not fall apart, all the various creations inside would collapse. There was only one chance. Thuzad made countless virtual models to explore the power and balance problems of the fortress. He even thought about whether to flip the fortress to the west, because the east side was the plague area that was almost completely destroyed. If the west side was facing down, then the most vulnerable east side would be facing up, avoiding the attack of the insects from underground. The only problem was air defense. Once this idea was put forward, it was firmly opposed by his subordinates. Although there was a leader like the big spider Meisner who was not afraid of environmental changes, most of the Undying were still in human form. They simply could not accept that the originally flat ground of Naxxramas had become a huge vertical wall. Moreover, would placing the most vulnerable side in the sky be able to ignore the enemy's attack? There were also a lot of flying insects and enemy leaders. For example, a big green insect called Princess Huhuran or something. The research was once again in trouble. After eliminating more than 300,000 Titan runes that should be meaningless, Thuzad finally found a strange set of unified commands. Generally speaking, when he typed up on the almost blank control panel, the entire fortress would generate an upward force. Typing down would cause it to go down. Ah! I found it! I found it! Thuzad was ecstatic. He handed over almost all of the defense to the only intelligent leader, the Black Witch Farina, while he focused on breaking the control system of the stronghold. There was no other way. Originally, for the sake of ease of control, Thuzad didn't place too many highly intelligent leaders in the stronghold, because his will was enough to control the entire fortress. As the battle progressed, the weaker leaders of each district were either killed or killed by the Dalajan's cannons. The only one left who was more intelligent was Farina. The rest were either martial artists, brainless constructs, or otaku liches who focused on forbidden magic and biological research. Farina, I'll leave the defense to you while I focus on researching the flying system of the stronghold. My request is not to let any of the functional areas fall into enemy hands. Don't let them invade the core area. If there's any danger, you must run to me immediately. Understood. The beautiful Dark Witch subconsciously squeezed her Mariana trench, only to realize that she was flirting with a blind man. No, a lich without a penis. However, she was really fascinated by the power. Especially when thousands of soldiers were willing to die under her command. The pleasure brought by supreme power almost made her moan with joy. But soon she couldn't laugh anymore. As a mage, her aptitude was second-rate. If he knew her character, Thuzad wouldn't have been interested in sending her to the front lines. As a result, she was basically a spectator in the war against the insects. The terrifying sea of insects almost stunned her from the start. As a last resort, she sent the powerful abominations and the Death Knights early on. The twin emperors were the 2 leaders of the Angela Temple, second only to Si Thun. Their combat power was not the strongest under Si Thun's command, but they were undoubtedly the most suitable to be commanders. Almost as soon as the Scourge's reaction became slow, the brothers sensed it. But they didn't respond immediately. After fighting for so many months, they were very clear about how difficult it was to deal with the Lich leader Thuzad. They instinctively suspected that this was a trap. However, when they secretly changed the composition of the attacking troops, using the high-mobility flying insects to beat the abominations who lacked cover, and using the long-range attack insects to tease the Death Knights, they confirmed that the enemy's commander had changed. Thus, an even grander and more meticulous attack was launched. Attacking separately, creating a diversion, all kinds of tactical combinations made the Scourge under Farina's command lose their bearings. But the Scourge was still considered a large force. The Liches continued to use the corpses to create abominations and other undead warriors, using more troops to maintain the front lines from collapsing. Until March 11th. In the northwest of Silithus stood the newly built fortress of the Cenarian Circle. On this day, this fortress, built with natural magic in the desert, welcomed an endless stream of troops. Green-skinned orcs, mostly lilac elves and white-skinned humans. 3 long lines of soldiers stretched from the edge of the fortress to the sky. Along with them were huge dragon men and dragon beasts. What was even more unimaginable was that the dwarves were chanting, and since the fall of Naxxramas, they had been laying the railway at an astonishing speed of 3,500 meters per day. The steam locomotive transported the pre-built prefabricated rails to the end of the railway, and the dwarven construction workers carried them and laid the railway. Because of the conspiracy of a transmigrator, 5 years ago, in the name of importing volcanic ash to make cement, a high-quality dual-gauge railway was built from the Tanaris Desert to the Ungoro crater from the hot sand port in the southeast of the Kalimdor continent, in the name of importing volcanic ash to make cement. All the dwarven workers had to do now was to build from the crater's pass to the Cenarian Circle, a distance of more than 100 kilometers. With the railway there would be artillery and there would be a steady stream of supplies. Kel Thuzad had a deep understanding of the Alliance's tactics. Duque had single-handedly brought Naxxramas here as cannon fodder, so he had long been sensitive to the Alliance's actions. Now that the Alliance tribe and the Sleeping Dragon Temple had come together, everyone knew that after the Alliance had settled the internal strife, they had freed up their hands and were ready to pick up the peaches. Kel Thuzad couldn't take it anymore and announced to the entire fortress, "Attention all members of the Scourge, the fortress has begun to move." Chapter 1247. The activation of the stronghold was nothing to the brainless low-grade undead. But for the high-grade undead who still had some ideas, it was definitely something to secretly breathe a sigh of relief. No one wanted to be destroyed even if they had already died once. The undead had no morale to speak of, but the high-grade undead were more intelligent. Seeing that the swarm was large, the necromancers began to be less stingy with their magic and began to release large-scale magic. Plague clouds and wide-area shadow magic covered the main roads of Naxxramas, and the insects easily fell to their deaths. Their bodies blocked the insects that came later and it was all a mess. Kel Thuzad, who was in the control room at the core of the stronghold, was actually very conflicted. He wasn't sure if the command group summarized from the basic control commands was really the source command. After all, the prosperity of the Pantheon was already 25,000 years ago. With Sargeras's burning crusade, he killed many titans and burned a large number of titan creations. The authentic titan language had been lost. Most of the titan creations obtained from the Burning Legion had been modified by demons. Similarly, the titan creations occasionally obtained in the world of Azeroth had been modified countless times over the years. Even the language had been modified. Kel Thuzad carefully compared the source command he found. For example, this sentence, good, study, de. Kel Thuzad was sure that this was different from all the languages he knew. It was different from the common human language and it was definitely not a variant of Elvish, Troll, Eridar, etc. because the words, sentences and grammar were all different. It should be the language of some destroyed country or race, Kel Thuzad was sure. He had no choice. He had to get Naxxramas out of danger as soon as possible. There was a real god behind Angela, and it was an evil god with a bad temper. Before the Lich King woke up, if he and his Naxxramas were destroyed here, it would be a waste. It was unknown whether the Lich King would avenge him in the future. In front of them was the Insect Tide, and behind them was the allied forces of the Sleeping Dragon Alliance. Stuck in the middle, there was only destruction. So he could only gamble. The huge bone palm that was the size of a water basin pressed firmly on the purplish-blue control screen of the void power furnace that gave off a technological feel. Kel Thuzad shouted, "Up! Up!" The entire stronghold shook violently. The fortress that had fallen for a long time had a mysterious energy radiance on its bumpy outer wall. Mysterious patterns spread out like water ripples, as if they were rippling and spreading. An ice-cold aura spread out, but everyone felt that this was a blood-boiling ancient beast awakening, baring its shining fangs at all existences that were spying on it. Yes, that's right. That was it. Kel Thuzad was extremely excited. Not only him but the other leaders of the Calamity Troop were also excited. Lord Kurtaz, one of the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse, rode his undead warhorse and charged at the hundreds of giant insects in front of him. Meteor. The Death Knight, who was a dwarf in his previous life, suddenly raised his right hand and summoned a huge flaming meteor, which shot towards the hundreds of insects at the entrance of the tunnel. The hundreds of insects in front were instantly turned into charcoal, and the insects in the back didn't fare any better. In the face of the unstoppable force, they were directly blown away and fell out of the passage of Naxxramas. Ah! As expected of Lord Kel, Thuzad. Finally, I don't have to look at those disgusting insects every day. Black Witch Farina let out a long sigh of relief, showing an expression of relief. After she took over the command, the Calamity Troop was once beaten like dogs, and the other leaders were quite critical of her. Since Kel Thuzad had regained control of the fortress, then she had successfully retreated. She thought about many things. Although she had suffered a great loss in command, at least she hadn't collapsed. Maybe I can be promoted to the chief of a certain area with this achievement? Seeing that they were getting further and further away from the ground, the insects below became smaller and smaller. Seeing that they were about to escape the sea of suffering, Farina couldn't help but look forward to it. At this moment, Naxxramas suddenly jumped violently, giving Kel, Thuzad and all the undead creatures a shock. Then, without any warning, the entire flying fortress began to lose its ability to float and plummeted to the ground. No, no, no. What are you doing? I want you to rise. Kel'Thuzad screamed. He quickly scanned the control panel with his scarlet eyes of the soul, only to see that on the control panel, almost all the data was normal. The only problem was that the system seemed to judge that he wanted to go down, not up. What was going on? The more Kel'Thuzad shouted, "Up!" the faster the fortress fell. With no other choice, he could only try to say, "Down." In the end, it fell even faster. Bam! Accompanied by a loud sound that shook the heavens and the earth, Naxxramas once again smashed onto the temple of Ankh-Karaj. Because it had risen for a distance before falling, this time it didn't fall on the ground, but directly smashed the first level of the temple and the first underground level. The undead in Naxxramas naturally lost their arms and legs, and the cursing sect disciples who were still alive also suffered serious casualties. Without giving the Calamity Troop any time to react, the fortress actually flew up again, but this time it was about the same. It flew up to a height of 500 meters, then fell down again. Then, a minute later, it flew up again and fell down. This time it was like a pile driver smashing back and forth, smashing the second underground level. On the Heavenbreaker, the big shots of the Alliance watched this scene with their mouths agape. When Naxxramas smashed in, it was like dog sh*t. Alright, if the first time was dog sh*t, then the second time was dog sh*t, and the third time was dog sh*t with a mace. That was terrible. Gavin Rad originally wanted to say something dirty, but he suddenly realized that the atmosphere was a bit inappropriate, so he could only ask, "Boss, did you secretly control Naxxramas? Then are you going to smash this flying fortress like a walnut?" Smash? How could a Titan's creation be so simple? Besides, both sides haven't even used their ultimate moves yet. But it's going to happen soon. Duque murmured. This was practically confirming what Duque had said. The next moment, the entire temple of Ankh-Karaj seemed to come alive. From every hole in the temple, a thick tentacle with eyes extended out. The blue eyeballs at the top of the tentacles looked like a dense patch of seaweed from afar. These eyes were so ominous and terrifying. Even if you had trypophobia or not, just looking at them would make you feel nauseous. Chapter 1248. These giant eye tentacles were the eyes of the ancient evil god Thun, and also its tentacles. If these tentacles with eyes were treated as onlookers who came to watch the show, it would be hilarious. 3 seconds later, hundreds of giant eye tentacles widened their eyes at the same time. Rays of natural light, similar to a chain of lightning, shot straight into every passageway and hole in the outer wall of Naxxramas. Almost without a sound, tens of thousands of insects, together with their enemies, turned into ashes in this huge lightning-like electric net, turning into nothingness. Feeling the sudden high-energy reaction from below the temple, Kel'Thuzad was scared out of his wits. With all his strength, he forcibly injected his magic into the control system, trying to use his own magic circuit to connect with the control circuit of the Titan's power furnace. Get up! Get up! This kind of violent cracking was something Kel'Thuzad had always avoided. After all, he didn't know what the consequences would be if he connected his magic circuit to a power furnace with such a huge energy requirement. Perhaps he would gain control of the system, or the power furnace would drain his magic in reverse. This was another big gamble. He didn't know if he had gambled correctly or lost. Anyway, the whole of Naxxramas rose slowly for the 4th time. However, this time Thun should be furious, and it was not going to let go of this fortress that had provoked its divine power again and again. What's more, the fortress itself had the Titan aura that it hated. If it couldn't enslave the Titan creation, then it would completely destroy it. In less than 3 seconds, a huge red beam of light with a diameter of at least 50 meters shot straight up from the ground, broke through the thick rock layer, and shot straight at Naxxramas, who had just flown up. Thuzad was so scared that his teeth almost broke. He no longer cared about holding back. This time he crushed a peculiar rune stone that he took out from his interspatial bag. Originally, this treasure, which was personally given to him by Lich King Arthas before he fell asleep, should have been his last resort. Unfortunately, he could no longer hold back. An incomparably gorgeous white light suddenly poured out of the suspended fortress. Bystanders could see from afar that huge clusters of ice were surging out of every window, every passageway, and every hole on the outer wall of the fortress that had been blasted open. In less than 1/100th of a second, these ice clusters formed an incomparably dense forest of icicles, and within 1/10th of a second, the entire fortress was wrapped in ice like a ball. This was a big move that was completely beyond the imagination of mortals. Perhaps only such a move could withstand the terrifying blow from Si Thun. The special skill, like the frozen tomb, collided with Si Thun's dark flash in midair. At that moment, the entire sky of Silithus seemed to flicker with the brilliance of the laws and elements. The clouds in the sky were instantly blasted apart. Even so, on the dissipating clouds everywhere that could be projected, there were still dense purplish-black flame patterns appearing. At the same time, more dark energy was attacking the huge ice ball that covered the entire flying fortress. Under the flickering light, the spectators in the distance could clearly see the faint silver network that was flashing under the layer of ice. Duque said solemnly, "Are those the lines of law?" Not every powerhouse could see so many lines. Everyone could only see that the violent explosion and the turbulence of energy had turned the entire sky into a mess. The aftermath of the explosion spread in all directions, with Naxxramas as the center. As if there was a moment of delay, a shock wave that swept through everything erupted. In just half a second, tens of thousands of Karaj flying insects were directly crushed into large and small pieces by the shock wave, falling from the sky like a heavy rain. The powerful elemental energy fluctuations caused all the surveillance magic mirrors to lose their images. This didn't matter. Even from 10,000 meters away on the suspended heaven breaker, they could still clearly see the huge cloud of flames rising in the distance. Duque turned back and said to the powerhouses of the Alliance, "It's not so easy to take advantage of them. These days, which powerhouse doesn't have 1 or 2 trump cards? If we had rushed up just now." Everyone knew the answer. At any moment, the Heaven Breaker, which represented the most advanced technology in the Alliance, would have been affected by Naxxramas's wide area of ice, or by Si Thun's dark flash, and swept into the turbulence of destruction. That would have been a classic case of being buried with them. Okay. Send the attack signal. If we don't go, Naxxramas will fall into Si Thun's hands. 3 red signal flares rose into the sky and exploded in the clear, cloudless sky. The red ball-shaped signal flares looked like 3 large fireworks. Sal raised the hammer of destruction high. Loktar. Loktar. 50,000 orcs raised the metal weapons in their hands, wearing heavy armor, and began to advance towards the Karaj temple from 10 kilometers away. Further ahead, there were thousands of dragons and half-dragons. They would be the vanguard of the allied forces. On the left, there were dwarf steam tanks equipped with sand filters and dust grills. On the right, there were more than 10,000 human cavalry. 1 kilometer behind the orcs, there was a neat central square formed by a mix of humans, dwarf gunners, Dalajan mages and elven archers. The task of all the mortal armies was to deal with Karaj's insect army. Thuzad's heart was bleeding. The ultimate move that his master had given him was something that would kill 10,000 enemies at the cost of 7,000 soldiers. Freezing all of Naxxramas would certainly be able to withstand such a powerful attack. But the price? In just an instant, all the fragile items in the fortress were destroyed by the expanding ice cubes in a single breath. Fragile skeletons and rotten zombies, all kinds of precious experimental equipment and information, and of course, the cursing disciples who were originally alive. As the leader of the cursed god, Thuzad definitely understood the importance of having living subordinates. It was because of these living people that he could rope in the fallen nobles and do things better in the human world. Now, other than the Black Witch Farina, there was no one else alive in the entire fortress. Clenching his teeth, Thuzad shouted, "Unseal!" The ice seal could not last long. Otherwise, even the undead would have all kinds of trouble. However, just as Naxxramas unsealed the ice seal and moved westward in an attempt to escape the Silithus area as soon as possible, the fortress once again shook violently. This time, it was no longer a problem with the fortress's floating system. Not good. The Alliance's flying ship has crashed right in. Chapter 1249. Be careful. Duque warned as he watched the Alliance's powerhouses split into two groups. This was the enemy's territory. Even if they had the upper hand in the early stages, they could never be too careful. Duque didn't specifically say anything to his women. He had already said what he wanted to say last night. He and Aurelia were lovers as well as like-minded comrades. Petty words of love were not suitable for them. Before they left, they expressed their love with an affectionate gaze. Ever since Turayan's disappearance, the Alliance had become short on manpower. After racking his brains, Duque finally decided on the teams. The ones going to the structure area were Magni, Gavin Rad, Benedettas, Aurelia, Sasha, Edwin Van Cleef and Alicia. The ones going to the military area were Tyrion, Liadeline, Korea, Tyrant, Sylvanas, Vanessa and Jaina. Including Duque, who had gone into the spider zone alone, there were exactly 15 of them. The rest were either defending the Alliance's territory or supporting William's side. My 40-man hero team. Who knew when he would be able to gather an all-star hero team again? Shaking his head to get the terrible reality out of his mind, Duque turned and set off. On his retina, Duque's vision had completely changed. Unlike the other heroes who advanced slowly and cautiously, Duque was simply unrestrained. After such a long period of observation and attaching all kinds of magical gadgets to the unprepared insects, and even the undying, the three-dimensional map of Naxxramas had long been imprinted in Duque's mind. Although he had also given Jaina and Alicia a copy, the two female spellcasters clearly didn't have such a heaven-defying positioning ability as Duque. When mainstream spellcasters used flash, they would at least see that the foothold was empty before they dared to flash there. Duque wasn't the same. He directly scanned the area and confirmed that it was safe. He didn't care if there were obstacles on the road or if there were visual shielding. Moreover, Duque was very sneaky. He flashed to a blind spot that even the undead couldn't detect, or to the top of a tall building. Of course, he also avoided the spider webs that covered the entire area. Don't underestimate those cobwebs that seemed to be gathering dust in the corner. That was because every small spider here was a descendant of the boss of the spider area, the giant spider, Meisner. This humongous female spider the size of a small mountain was the ancestor of all spiders as well as their ruler. Any foreign existence, as long as it was not from the spider area, would be discovered immediately. Except for Duque. If Farina the Black Witch was still here, she might have sensed the strong arcane waves caused by Duque's high-speed flash. Unfortunately, Farina had been transferred to the central control area. Meisner, who relied too much on his physical senses, did not notice Duque's arrival. This was because every time Duque paused, the tip of his foot would step on a rock that wasn't covered by cobwebs, or even a protruding candlestick or even a torch. To mortal guards, if a torch suddenly went out somewhere, it would definitely attract attention. But spiders were different. Candlesticks that were always lit were places that the spider webs couldn't touch. Small spiders wouldn't go there either. But the necessary candlesticks were necessary for the followers of the cursing sect. This was because most of them were living people, not undead creatures that used their souls to see the way. This was where the blind spot was. Meisner's lair was a huge cylindrical tower with a diameter of at least 100 meters. It was unknown where the pitch-black top led to, and the deep hole that was covered by dense and crisscrossing cobwebs seemed to lead to hell. Strange purple square boulders with golden decorative lace almost covered the entire cylindrical tower tightly. The only entrance was a huge gap that was 2 stories high, and about 3 trucks could pass through it side by side. That was for the giant spider, Meisner, to enter and exit, but usually the entire gap would be covered by 3 layers of cobwebs. Logically speaking, no creature should be able to bypass Meisner's senses and enter his lair without making a sound. Duque was an exception. Following the route set by the system, Duque turned his body into a streak of arcane light, thin and long. Even the fluctuations of arcane elements didn't touch the cobwebs. In the next instant, Duque had already flown above Meisner's body. At this moment, this giant female spider was just like Duque's impression of it. Its sickle-shaped, furry, and long legs were enough to cast a shadow over any woman's heart. Each of its legs rested on the thickest strand of cobwebs. Even if someone thousands of meters away touched the tiniest strand of cobwebs, the vibrations would be reflected back to Meisner. Then, the intruder would easily be surrounded and killed by the spiders that surged out from the sky and the ground. But Duque beautifully avoided all of these senses. This was Duque's advantage. It was also Duque's killing move. Only by killing the final boss of the spider area as quickly as possible could he regroup with the other two teams. Duque drew his sword. The peculiar spiral-shaped sword was like a dark shadow, soundless and silent. It was only when the tip of the sword touched Meisner's skull that it suddenly shone with the most resplendent golden splendor. The golden splendor that blossomed in that instant was the most dazzling of colors, as if it had instantly replaced the dark space. The godly sword special effect, Demon Slayer, activated. If the first half of the sword was like the summoning of hell, strange and secretive, then the second half of the sword was a classic example of shaking the heavens and shaking the earth, like a spring thunder. The golden splendor came from the top of Meisner's skull, silently and forcefully attacking. It was an extremely powerful and shocking sword. Meisner didn't even have the time to tremble in fear. He was already defenseless and had no choice but to take the attack head-on. Duque was also dirty. He was clearly a wizard, but his most powerful move was to use the godly sword in his hand to assassinate. From killing Sargeras to killing Archerons, it had to be said that after countless experiences, Duque's grasp of the timing of an assassination had reached the pinnacle. Coupled with the godly sword's special effect, this sword was simply unstoppable. It was unstoppable. Spiders didn't look like creatures with strong defenses, and their defensive capabilities were only relative. If it was the small steel cannon that had blasted the orcs to tears in the scorching canyon, even 3 days and 3 nights wouldn't be able to shatter its skull. But with Duque's sneak attack there could only be one result. The grand final boss of the spider area, Meisner, who had undergone a special transformation and had fused with an unknown amount of evil energy, suddenly opened his terrifying mouth full of spikes. Spiders didn't have a voice, but even so, Duque could still feel that it seemed to be letting out a mournful cry. Very quickly, this soundless cry was cut off. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.